You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Again, thanks for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Tune in and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast. Jay will be back on the show on Tuesday, spending some family time up in the Big Apple. So enjoying some of that time. So can't wait to hear about his trip. But the Oklahoma Sooners have had a very interesting portal season. Okay. You look at the departures and the 17 guys that have found new homes so far this offseason. 16 of those have landed at Power 4 schools. 10 of those 17 guys have landed at Big Ten or SEC schools. So you're seeing the talent from Oklahoma get redistributed to Power 4 programs. The only one that didn't end up at a Power 4 program, that's Jaquays Petaway. And he went to East Carolina, an interesting landing spot for him, for the former top 100 prospect. But you look at what Oklahoma's added, and they're taking a very different approach. They have not been attacking the transfer portal in a way that I think most of us expected or even wanted them to. You got John Mateer, and that was the big fish, right? That was the one that you had to have this offseason, right? You had to have a veteran quarterback, or at least you felt like you had to have a veteran quarterback to help usher in the Ben Arbuckle era. Ben Arbuckle is really high on Michael Hawkins and what he brings to the table and is excited to work with and help him develop. But you needed a veteran quarterback to solidify the room, to solidify the quarterback room. And you've got that in Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer. But everywhere else, Oklahoma is kind of reaching down past the Power 4 for players. You had the Luke Baklenko addition from Stanford at offensive tackle. And then everywhere else, you're going to the FCS level or the group of 5, which is a little bit surprising. It's a different approach. Again, Oklahoma's trying to kind of play a little bit of money ball, I think, and hoping that they can find some diamonds in the rough out there. But the other one, Isaiah Satania, you got from Arkansas. That's the other kind of big Power 4 addition that you've made in the transfer portal. But otherwise, looking at it, you've added Carson Kent. As a transfer, he was considered a 3-star prospect. He was unrated coming out of high school. You added Derek Simmons from Western Carolina, Keontae Lewis from Keontae Lewis was Southern Illinois, and Giovanni Gibson was Arkansas Pine Bluff. Forgive me for that. And then Jacob Ulrich from Kennesaw State. So you're not really going to the Power 4 well to add guys this offseason, whereas a lot of other programs are doing that, adding Oklahoma Sooners for their Power 4 programs. It's an interesting approach. Again, I think they're looking to see if they can find some guys that have been productive at the level that they were at and want to continue to prove themselves, right? It's like trading for a AAA player or a AA player in baseball. Like, you see the production at the AA level, you see the tools that they've got, and you're offloading veteran pieces and you're trying to bring in some prospects that you think can help you, are going to be able to help the big club. Now, the difference being, when you're trading for AA prospects, single A prospects, you're usually putting them back into your minor league system and then continuing to develop them. Well, you don't really have that luxury at the college football level. You have to get those guys in your system, develop them right away, and they've got to become impactful players for you. The other thing that they're doing, and we kind of touched on it in the first segment, the other thing that they're doing is they're adding guys that aren't going to be progress stoppers. They're adding guys that are going to add competitive depth, but aren't going to keep you from developing the guys that you've got in-house. They're not going to preclude guys like Zion Kearney or Zion Reagans or Ivan Ketteryon at wide receiver from developing, or a guy like Elijah Thomas out of Chakotah from coming in and taking a job right away as a freshman. At offensive line, you're adding Luke Baklenko and Derek Simmons, guys you maybe think are going to start, but what if Jacob Sexton, Jake Taylor emerge and stay healthy, or Logan Howland continues his development and becomes a starter for you? Okay, that's better, but you're getting competition everywhere. And John Mateer is the one guy that I think everybody expects is going to be a starter that they've added in the transfer portal, or Jacob Ulrich, the punter from Kennesaw State, you probably expect to come in here and be a starter for you because he's got so much experience. But everywhere else, you're kind of just adding guys and hoping that the competitive depth that you have on offense is going to create this high tides raise all ships sort of a thing where, iron sharpens iron, and they are going to build off of that competition and create a situation where somebody goes out there and like earns a job. We'll see. And we'll see if the Ben Arbuckle edition and the John Mateer editions are going to be enough for Oklahoma to be able to take all this talent that they've gotten from the lower levels and build on. But we'll see. But I mean, you add guys like Keontez Lewis and Giovanni Gibson who have been productive at the FCS level. You're adding dudes that have a little bit of an edge to them and some competitiveness to them, and they're wanting to come in and compete for a role. And I'm all for that. But what else does Oklahoma need? It's hard to like look at any one specific position and say, you gotta add that. You gotta add that. You gotta, maybe cornerback still is one spot where you're like, okay, maybe adding a veteran is going to be important for Oklahoma. But you like Eli Bowen, you like Gentry Williams. And if those two guys, and you like Jacoby Johnson, if those three guys are back and they continue to develop, Gentry stays healthy, then you feel good about the position with those three guys. Eli Bowen, even for some of the ways he got beat this year, he showed that you've got someone that you can build your cornerback room around. Gentry Williams has shown you enough when he's been able to stay healthy that you feel good about where he's at. Jacoby Johnson, the tools are there. He just needs to continue to develop and get experience. And he's going to get better and better. Safety, I think you feel good about it, especially if Robert Spears-Jennings comes back. Then you got Robert Spears-Jennings and Peyton Bowen and Reggie Powers and Michael Boganowski and Jaden Hardy. That's a really good group of 5 guys that you can build your safety room around. You bring Kendall Dolby back into the mix at Cheetah. You feel good about it. Linebacker, you feel really good about. Maybe you want to add a veteran option, but maybe not, because you've got a lot of guys on that on the depth chart at linebacker that you feel really, really good about. Kobe McKenzie has gotten better the more he's played. Kip Lewis has gotten better the more that he's played. Samuel Omasigo, Lewis Carter, same thing. Jaron Kanik is kind of the longest tenured guy in the linebacker room now, and he's going to be a leader for that group. But I think he's still going to be a rotational player, but still has a lot of athleticism and speed that can do a lot of good things for you at linebacker and on special teams. So I think he's still an important piece there. If there's a linebacker from a team that's still competing in the playoff that you think, hey, we got to get that guy, we got to add him to our squad, then okay. But I feel decent at linebacker, defensive line. A lot's going to depend on what happens with Dominic Williams. But otherwise, at defensive tackle, you're looking at Jaden Jackson and David Stone and Grayson Halton as a nice little trio to build around. And then you can go into the portal and try and find a guy at defensive tackle if you don't think Dominic Williams is coming back. And then you can continue to develop Marcus Strong and Trent Wilson. And I think that's a really solid group there. And actually, it's a really good group, not just solid, really good, because we saw what Jaden Jackson's capable of. We saw Grayson Halton's emergence this year to 5 sacks. David Stone, we know the player that he can be. Just got to continue to develop. And then at edge, if R. Mason Thomas is back, love where we're at. Doesn't matter what else we got. You got to find somebody to replace Ethan Downs. And Oklahoma is pursuing edge prospects in the transfer portal. Whether they can be Ethan Downs or not, we'll see. But if you've got R. Mason Thomas, you got Adepoju Adebaware and Danny Okoye and Nigel Smith, that's a young group, but it gives you something to start from. It gives you a building block, right? Alexander Shieldknight, another guy that can be impactful for you at defensive end. Offensively, I mean, again, unless you can find a guy that is a legit number 1 wide receiver, kind of like what we saw from Jeremiah Smith. If you're going to find that guy in the transfer portal, okay. If you see a guy that is just head and shoulders above anybody that you've got on offense, then you could bring him in, but don't just add guys that are going to be depth pieces just to add guys. Let your competition play out and let's see who's going to emerge and become a starter, because you've got a long way to go on offense. You've made some moves this offseason that are going to hopefully make you better offensively, but you've got to see what you've got in-house. You've got to see what you've got in your 4-star wide receivers, Ivan Carrion and Zion Reagans and Zion Kearney. and Elijah Thomas. You got to see what you've got in your offensive line group that's got some nice young pieces on the depth chart. You've got to see what you've got at running back, because running back is looking really good with Xavier Robinson and Taylor Tatum. And if Javonte Barnes is back, and if Gavin Sawchuk is back next year, you got to feel good about where you're going, especially with a guy like Torrey Blaylock coming in as well. So there's not a lot of like no-brainer places that you have to add a guy anymore. Oklahoma's kind of filled its needs, quote unquote. But again, if there's a guy that's head and shoulders above somebody that you've got on the depth chart on the roster right now, then that's pretty much all you've got to do. Maybe go add another edge rusher, because as we saw with South Carolina, as we saw this past weekend with Ohio State, having a dynamic duo that can rush the passer pretty much at will, man, that makes a big, big difference.